X-Men. Get it!
Hey everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Belly Adam. This is your weekly X-Men podcast where we rank every story from A to Z.
I'm Adam.
And I'm Zach. And Adam, I got a question for you.
Sure.
What's up?
What's up?
What's up? Guys, I have good news, and that's that the dream of the 90s is alive again. And in this episode, we are back to talk about all that fun 90s stuff. We're not going to have a cowman. It's gonna be a good time. We're going to talk about, quote, the request was good stuff from the 90s that you haven't covered yet.
I think we found some fun stuff for this episode. So we're going to talk about my dude Bishop. We're going to talk about Maggot later.
We're going to talk about my dude Maggot, yeah.
We got some Acolyte stuff today. I mean, we did find some cool 90s stuff. So
I like to think we went into the comics trenches, deep diving into those long boxes. And we picked out issues that would very frequently be found in long boxes, yes.
Yes, you could probably find most of these issues in your dollar box at the comic store, given the print runs. So, who made this request? Did we say that?
We didn't yet, but I'll do it right now.
Tell the
who
people.
made this request for the people. Just so you know, Ben Yakas said, "Guys, talk about some good X-Men comics from the 90s, from the main series." So that's what we did, because there's a lot of X-Men comics that are good from not the main series in the 90s, and then the main series is actually mixed, to say the least.
Well, we're gonna start off with a heck of a creative team here, and this is Uncanny X-Men 287 to 290, which is basically covers after Enter the Void, when Bishop joins the X-Men.
Yeah, there was a trade paperback called Bishop's Crossing that went for a good chunk of X-Men issues, and it collects the start of the Portasio stuff through the end of the Portasio stuff.
Through the end of the Portasio stuff.
And it's split into two halves. One is the Fitzroy stuff at the beginning, and Bishop shows up in the present. Then there is a weird thing where they go rescue Mikhail Rasputin from an alien dimension. Mm-hmm. And then Bishop joins the X-Men.
Right. And for my money, this is the more fun part.
Adam, I know you were reading around this time, but
definitely
were you picking these up off the stands, off those spinner racks?
Weirdly enough, I was only reading the Jim Lee X-Men book. I think I read the first couple issues of the Uncanny relaunch, and but I think I stopped right before Bishop got introduced. So, I was aware of what was going on with the book, but I wasn't picking it up at the same time.
Because that's my question, and I would love it if some of our readers jumped onto the Twitter thread where we post this, or shoot us an email, giving us their experience of this whole gap between Bishop showing up and Bishop actually joining the X-Men. Was there like mystique or questions about who this Bishop guy is and if he was going to be a hero or a villain? Or did the marketing pretty much said Bishop's going to be a new X-Men character? Give us a second.
I think it's the latter, especially because
it's the latter.
Yeah, my first exposure to the character really was not in his first appearances at all. I got acquainted with the character when he popped up in X-Men Volume 2, drawn by Jim Lee.
In that part where he throws a pie at Gambit. Or no, Gambit throws a pie at him.
Right, and it's already the fully formed fanboy that we will see in this arc. So no, there was no mystique. I think if anything, the mystique is around the end of the X-Men, right? Because during this arc, we do get the scene where the Malcolm, Randall, and Bishop stumble onto the video recording of Jean Grey, which later turns out to
witness?
Be right.
That the witness gives, LeBeau, the witness.
Yep.
Who is? Had they would have had to have revealed Gambit's last name at this point because the Thieves Guild arc was running almost concurrent with this.
Yeah, and that's why the implication when you see Bishop interact with Gambit in X-Men, the other series, is that Bishop assumes that this LeBeau is the same LeBeau as the witness. Makes perfect sense.
Guys. It is Gambit, except for they decided later that it wasn't.
Right.
Like, end of the day, no matter what anyone says, it Gambit.
It definitely
Gambit's
was.
the traitor to the X-Men. Like, that's the whole thing. And they decide for it to be a misdirect because, spoiler alert, Onslaught was not well thought out.
No, and then they had to figure out, well, what bad thing did Gambit do? Oh, he was responsible for the mutant massacre. That's
then they had to figure out a thing that they failed to do ever since the moment after Onslaught ended, which was, what do we do with Bishop now?
Right.
And they've never been able to square that circle because Bishop has a very clear objective here.
He sure does. Before we get any further, though, I do want to talk about the creative team here because this is at a very weird transition time for the book. So 287 is written, plotted, and then written by Jim Lee and Scott Lobdell. So Jim is still involved, but is penciled by John Romita Jr. and then inked by a bevy of people, including Bob Wyacek and Bill Sienkiewicz and Scott Williams,
Dan
and Dan Panosian.
And Christopher Ivey as well.
Yes.
Well, we went with everyone else.
I want to talk about that in just a second. The second issue is we have John Byrne involved here. Scott Lobdell, Jim Lee, and Will Sportaccio on writing credits. Then penciled by Andy Kubert and inked by Bill Sienkiewicz, which I also want to talk about. And then 289 and 290 are just Scott Lobdell, Will Sportaccio, and Scott Williams. So in no short order, I just want to say before we talk about the story that these issues are really interesting to think about just artistically, because the combination of John Romita Jr., who typically works in a very blocky way, with someone like Scott Williams, who is, always associated with Jim Lee and does a much more refined inking style, is really interesting. And the same is true for mixing Andy Kubert, who's typically with Matt Green, with I hope I'm getting his name right. I always mix up Andy Kubert's general inker, but mixing him with Bill Sienkiewicz, who does some inks around this time with Kubert, is really cool. Like, you can definitely see the styles clashing in a way that's really interesting and vibrant.
No, I really, really like, especially on these first two issues, some of the big artistic swings that they take here. Because it's weird and it's cool. Yeah.
Absolutely wild seeing Scott Williams cross-hatching, mixing with JR, who typically does sort of... I don't know if you've noticed this, but JR has this thing where he will show different planes of objects and corners of objects, even on faces, with straight lines. So he will do, not cross-hatching, and I realize I'm moving my hands despite the fact that our listeners can't hear us.
It's different tangential lines, or not tangential, perpendicular lines going off of the planes.
Right.
I guess from a plane it's tangential.
Yeah, so you might have like a bridge.
Or it's parallel to the plane, now that I say that out loud.
Yeah. So you might see the bridge of someone's nose with like a variety of horizontal lines working down it to show, the mass and the form of that object. And then to see Scott Williams come in and do his little quick triangular bursts, and then later in the issue to see Sienkiewicz try and do like his scratchy kind of thing over top of it. It's just really cool to see a Jam issue like that.
It really is. And I think it's very interesting to see an inking Jam issue when you have such different styles. Like this, was it rushed? Probably. Like, end of the day, this was a time when everyone was a little rushed right now. I get it, though it is coming from JR, who's a consummate professional.
Yeah,
so,
there are 2 pages here that just straight up look like Scott Williams maybe drew over the very barest of JR's layouts.
I mean, if you listen to Byrne, and I think you should take everything John Byrne says with a big old grain of salt, but in this case, I think he's not talking about women, so he's probably being truthful here in that he said he left the books because it was so unorganized and Jim Lee and Will Sportasio did not know a dang thing about planning out books. Something that Jim Lee, at least, would admit later in life.
Oh, sure.
I'm sure Wills has too. I've not read that interview.
Yeah, I mean, these are young guys who are very art-driven, who have, some cool ideas for the books, but at the same time, you got to get these things out on a monthly basis. So, our first issue does pick up back where Bishop, Malcolm, and Randall have come to the past. Malcolm and Randall are killed, but then we also get this flashback that we talked about before with seeing Jean Grey at the moment that the X-Men are betrayed. We also get introduced to the Witness, which never really quite leads to anything, unfortunately.
Is LeBeau.
And
the Witness.
Bishop is introduced as the new member of the X-Men.
Yeah, and what Bishop struggles with here is 2 things. Because one, Bishop is a cop, but he's not a traditional cop. I'm not saying that cops are good. I'm saying that Bishop is not writing parking tickets. Bishop is essentially a militaristic police force that was set up by mutants to patrol just exclusively mutants. For the idea of Xavier's dream of peaceful coexistence. Now that I say it out loud, he does sound like a regular cop, a lot of this, actually. So maybe I take back some of that. But he's very much in, like, super cop future soldier kind of mold than really law officer all that much.
Absolutely. I mean, especially given that the criminals that he hunts down are pretty much exclusively serial killers, right? And
he is only being a cop against the worst possible people imaginable, which
right.
Probably a little bit of good old 1992 propaganda going on. But
his whole thing is, these are mass killers and I'm going to shoot them in the face. And we get one of these scenes. Bishop is just trying to get acquainted with New York City. And Bishop gets into a fight with one of the remaining time-traveling supervillains. What's this guy's name?
It's Steiglut. Y'all know about Steiglut, right?
Everybody's favorite.
Steiglut and his 3 appearances.
Very similar to Mountjoy. He is also sort of a, like, I suck the energy out of other people. He doesn't take on their form, but that's his power set. Everybody's
he has the power to absorb life energy and channel it into blasts of destructive force, which might as well be the go-to villain power of 1992.
Yeah, sounds about right. So Bishop's having some trouble adjusting to the 90s.
Because the X-Men don't kill. That's what Storm is very clear about. Storm, who last episode, as we were pretty clear about, did stab a woman in the heart without thinking about it. The X-Men don't kill.
Colossus is also like, well, sometimes we do, but generally we're not a killer group.
Bishop, you don't have to kill this guy. Like, we get it. We all understand. If you're in a bind, we're not going to judge you. Wolverine's our best friend. But don't go out of your way to kill these guys.
Right. So
and Bishop struggles with that because he's like, but they're really bad. They murdered... Steiglut just murdered my 2 best friends, Malcolm and Randall. Can I kill him, please?
Pretty please? Pretty please. This gets like cycled over and over again. We see this in the Shattershot annual. We see this come back over and over again with Bishop. I think they play it up again in Executioner's Song. So, that's the back and forth with this character, quote unquote. What's more fun, I think, is in once you start to get into the Bishop as fanboy. He gets introduced to Cyclops in the latter half of this arc. He is just completely starstruck. He's following Storm around kind of like a lost puppy. And we are also getting two other plot lines added in these last two issues. One is that Bobby and Opal Tanaka have decided to... Bobby is going to introduce Opal to his racist father and his not so sympathetic mother. They are going to get...
His mother is also racist. She's just quieter about it.
Yes. We don't say these things out loud.
Right.
They are going to get attacked by the Cyber Eye, which is going to lead to Hero, one of the Cyber Eye, trying to defend them and eventually killing himself and everybody else in a restaurant.
Listen, the Cyber Eye are nonsense.
They are. They sure are.
The Cyber Eye are too silly for this very silly plot. It's like, okay, yeah, we get it. We get it. We get it. They're friggin' Blade Runner ninjas. Okay,
yeah,
that's fine.
They don't look nearly as cool in this arc as they did in the original appearance either. They kind of just have some very vague gold-plated armor here, and they're like, this is an upgrade. I'm not so sure.
Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah.
But we also get a plot point. Storm is, well, dealing with the fact that her long-term boyfriend, Forge, is struggling with their relationship and his place in it, and doesn't know what's going on. He's dealing with a prophecy that Destiny gave him before Mystique, or before Destiny died, and Mystique shows up at the mansion, and he's like, "Oh no, wait! Destiny had a prophecy that me and Mystique would fall in love, but I love Storm, and I don't know what to do." And he decides he's going to propose to Storm, and Storm does the worst thing. Listen, I love Storm. I feel like the last episode was a good symbolic gesture of we love Storm a lot.
Absolutely.
Storm does make a mistake by saying the worst thing, which is nothing and I'll think about it to a proposal, which is worse than no.
In Storm's defense, okay, this is a relationship. Now, I want to compliment the fact that they even revisited this at all. I think a lot of things that happen after the Mutant Genesis launch seem to ignore a lot of what happened in the Claremont era. So for them to go back and acknowledge the year that they spent together in this alternate dimension, right?
And follow the mutants, yes.
Right? So that's kind of cool. But in Storm's defense, the way we see Forge act in especially the final issue of this is absolutely terrible.
Forge
has
Forge
the final thing in this arc is this monologue of Forge basically like telling Storm that she is just this terrible person for acting heroic and always being committed to saving the world and not being willing to just settle down with him.
I don't want to say in Forge's defense, but in Forge's defense,
please tell me what you could possibly say. I don't know what you could say.
I think a more charitable reading of that scene is Forge coming to the realization that the X-Men are always going to be more important to Storm than any individual person. And that's what her life is, but that's not the life he wants.
Yes. Did he have to say it out loud? I don't know. What I will say...
He doesn't go about it the best way. I'll agree with you.
It does make for an absolutely heartbreaking final page when we see Storm collapse to her knees and say that she was going to say yes. Now, she's out of earshot of Forge, so he never hears this, but
because what happens, and this is important, is that after Storm flies away, Forge is being sad, and he sees Jean Grey, and Storm's talked to Jean about this, And Ford just said, what's she going to say? And Jean has the worst look on her face and said, well, it's not my place to say. And it's definitely a thing where if I'm Forge, I'm like,
crap.
You're not helping, Jean. This is making things worse.
Yeah, there's some other stuff here with Mystique. It's implied that she's like losing her mind. There's some other stuff with Warren here. This is just like chock full of stuff they're throwing at the wall.
It's weird that these 4 issues are not a lot of plot. It's a lot of character building, actually.
Yes.
Especially with Bishop, but with Storm and others as well.
Honestly, I like it. I think it's fun. And let's try and rank this, because we have ranked things that are directly around this.
Or you're talking about ranking, like that thing we do as we try and determine the official forever ranking of every X-Men story of all time from best to worst, of which we have done 633 stories on our road to 700. The first story is The House of X, The Powers of 10. The number 100th best story is X-Men 314, Early Frost. The 200th story is Mercury Falling from New X-Men. 300 is the Lovelorn arc of Uncanny X-Men, 504 to 507. That's from the Action Fraction era. Death of X is at 400. At number 500 is The Fall of the Mutants from New Mutants, which is bad. That has Bird Boy in it. Number 600 is Ages of Apocalypse, and the Draco's at the bottom. Where's Into the Void?
All right. So Bishop's Crossing is down at 385 on our list, and Into the Void is above that at 360. And I think
this is better than Into the Void.
I think this is better than Into the Void. So, looking up the list, because I do enjoy these issues. I think they're artistically interesting, and I think there's a lot of like weird sort of, I don't know, there's a segue happening here between like where the books were and where they are going into, further nonsense.
I have a area that I think is accurate.
All right, where are you thinking? Oh yeah.
I know that number 305 right now, which is Uncanny X-Men 300, is better than this.
Okay. I can get behind that.
I am curious. I think this is better than the Deadpool Axis arc. What I'm curious about is right around 309 and 310, which is Soul Possessions and A Song of Mourning, A Cry of Joy, the Threnody story from X-Men Volume 2.
I like this better than both of those, I think, especially because of the art.
I think that's fair, but at like 307, we have the Nightcrawler versus Arcade story, which I think is better than this.
I would agree. But I also would put this ahead of at 308, Zeb Wells' Necrotia, The Return of Doug and the Hellions. So that would make it our new 308.
That'll be our new 308. It's Bishop joins the X-Men.
Nice. That was probably the most complicated of the stories that we talk about tonight.
Absolutely the most complicated of the stories that we've talked about today. The next story is shorter and much more straightforward.
Yes. And
you remember,
has a return of an artist.
It does. Adam, you remember the Age of Apocalypse, right?
I sure do.
You know how at the end of the Age of Apocalypse, a few things kind of slipped into our world?
Like the Sugar Man or the X-Man.
Nick Gray, that beep 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 beep. It's the X-Man update. He comes back from Age of Apocalypse because he shoved a shard of the Macron crystal into the face hole of Apocalypse's son, Holocaust, who also comes into the regular universe, but he comes in space. So close to Avalon.
Well, these are interesting because this arc, which is X-Men,
42 to 44.
42 to 44.
The Fall of Avalon.
Come directly after Age of Apocalypse and what is it? X-Men Prime? Alpha?
X-Men Prime.
X-Men Prime. Okay, so we did have that Jam book relaunch that sort of guided us into this era. But really, the books are kind of like yeah, just catch up as you go, with what the story is here. And what's really fascinating is that despite having an Andy Kubert, Matt Ryan, that's it, Matt Ryan, not Matt Green, Matthew Ryan, you have my apologies, cover here, we actually have Paul Smith doing the first 2 issues here.
Yeah, Paul Smith from the good X-Men stuff.
That is fascinating. We're also we've got Fabian writing.
Friend of the show, Fabian Nicieza.
Right. Now, here's what makes this interesting is that I think I've talked in the past, actually pretty recently, about Paul Smith and how who inks him has a lot to do with the quality of your Paul Smith, right? And if you go and look on Paul Smith's social media, you'll see absolutely gorgeous Paul Smith art that he's inking himself. But when he gets paired up with an inker that doesn't quite get his style, it can be a little bit limiting. And we noticed that in Judgment War when we ranked that long ago. Here, he's paired with Andy Kubert's inker, Matt Ryan, and the results are kind of flat.
They are. It's not bad. It's just not what you want it to be.
Yeah, it's also not helped by the digital colors.
Oh, guys, this is... And the cover tells you it. The cover tells you everything you need to know. Colors were in a rough spot starting from this moment until...
Till?
2012, maybe? 2010? When did they stop around 2010 they stopped doing the terrible gradients and they start to actually make colors be good.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of interesting Photoshop experimentation and color separation and God knows.
We were learning
else.
how computers worked, and it took us 15 years.
Yeah. There's a lot of, whoa, that looks cool, but maybe it didn't.
Saying, coloring, we're better at it now.
That's correct. So Exodus is leading the Acolytes now, right? And they've discovered the mummified, wrapped up remains of Holocaust floating through space. Not a good person to pick up onto your spaceship.
Yeah, for people who don't know, this is one of Apocalypse's horsemen from the Age of Apocalypse, and he's evil. He's a glowing skeleton that normally wears a containment suit because he's constantly spewing out radiation. But he's knocked out in space, and the Acolytes are like, well, this is a mutant. We'll help him. We'll put him in our spaceship.
That's nice.
Well, that would be great, except for Rusty Collins, who, getting up from his sex bed with Skids, is talking about how, man, do we really join another cult? Should we have joined this cult?
Poor Rusty and Skids.
No, poor Skids. Rusty got what he deserved. Poor Skids.
Well, he's not even the first person to get it here. This poor guy Milan, who jacks into the internet via an Ethernet cable in his eyeball.
You're talking about Francisco Milan?
He gets burned to death first.
He does. And then Rusty Collins does die. Javits dies in this arc. You remember Javits, right?
There's quite a bit of Acolytes here, and you really don't need to remember them all.
Here's who you need to remember in this one. Joanna Cargill.
Right? Frenzy.
Amanda Voigt.
Yep. Colossus.
He's an X-Men first.
And Skids.
You really don't even need to know Skids. It's just really funny that Skids is in this. But Avalon, the Acolyte's base, gets hecked up pretty bigly after Holocaust absorbs the Fire Fist powers. Everything's falling to Earth, and Amelia Voigt comes and says, yo, X-Men, I need your help. And I don't like saying that. So Scott and Jean immediately show up to help. Like, they say, yeah, mutants are in trouble. Let's go.
Well, hold on a sec. We have to acknowledge the fact that Amelia somehow, uses her fog powers. Keep in mind that Amelia Voigt's power is basically to turn into fog, right? she doesn't have teleportation powers, but somehow she's able to go from Avalon to the X-Mansion to ask for the help, and then somehow get Cyclops and Jean back up to the spaceship, but can't get everybody out?
Will worrying add but one moment to your life, Adam?
Doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's okay.
It doesn't.
So they get split up. Jean and Skids make it back to Earth thanks to Skids' force field powers, right?
Yep.
But the last issue is Cyclops guiding the remaining acolytes through the outback of Australia, where they're hoping to find Gateway from the Silvestri era to bring them back to the X-Mansion.
Yeah, so Cyclops is like, okay, we're in Australia. I know that. Because I know what time it was, and it's the opposite time. And we're in a desert. So we're in Australia. That's good. And then he says, I think... Well, he doesn't say it, but his thought process is, I think around here is that base that I never went to that the X-Men said they had in Australia. Which I buy that Scott Summers immediately pulled up a map and memorized the coordinates. Like, it makes sense that he'd be like, oh, what luck. In this giant desert, we are very close to the one place I know.
Right. Oh, man.
But what's interesting is you got Unision, who is kind of quiet in this issue because she's dealing with the fact that Scott pushed her to her limits to save everybody's life, and she's processing, like, I did a pretty cool and good thing, and I don't know how to feel about that.
Yeah, I think all the acolytes are reassessing. They're all kind of like, oh, now we forgot to point out that Colossus and the comatose Magneto ended up by the Magneto snow base that we saw in X-Men Unlimited 1, and then run into the cliffhangers. They run into Callisto, who's in there in a spacesuit for some reason. It's weird.
It comes back up with the G Nation stuff later. Don't worry about that part.
Right.
But what I think is interesting is what Frenzy, Joanna Cargill, how her story develops in this, because she was one of the most established characters to join the Acolytes, which is to say she had appeared once before
Right.
or twice. Not much.
Yeah.
But she essentially tells the Kleinstocks, who are being real dummies, yo, chill out. Don't be giving Cyclops a hard time. He literally just saved all of our lives, and I don't see you big idiots doing anything about that. So maybe let this mutant do his job for a second, guys. And I really like how... I like that in just this scene, and then I like what what Mike Carey adds to that later with, like, it being a thing now that Frenzy, like, thinks Cyclops is good at things.
Right. Yeah, the respect is started right here, that relationship. So there's some cool stuff here. Now, the third issue is not Paul Smith. We get back to Andy Kubert, and I think the style makes a lot more sense with the story.
Yeah, Kubert. Paul Smith was an artist for a very specific time, and that time was far too short.
Yeah, it's a little difficult to ask Paul Smith to do something bombastic like this, where it's basically all explosions, and...
That's the thing, they get him for the big explosion part and not for the walking through the desert with character drama part.
Probably would have been good to reverse it, right?
You flip-flop this, I bet we have a different conversation.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It is cool to see him draw, especially like Colossus. The way he draws Colossus is just like classic. It brings it all back. But this is a mixed bag. I think Fabian's writing is, pretty good here for the era.
It's fine. It's all completely fine.
Yeah. But the shoehorning of the Age of Apocalypse stuff into the 616, especially stuff like this that really doesn't need to be, is I don't know. I don't like it so much.
Was there a single good story that came from Holocaust being in the 616?
No. I would argue no. Not that I've read. He's a stupid character.
He's not very good. He is going to be at least appearing in the Steve Orlando Marauders, which is interesting.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that works. Well, wait a minute. He is in Dark Angel Saga, right? I mean, I guess that's...
Yeah, but all he does is... Well, okay. No, Adam, that is not Age of Apocalypse.
Oh, right. Okay, forget I said that.
That is
right.
is the Holocaust that You remember Pestilence from The Fall of the Mutants?
Yep.
The teenage girl that became Pestilence?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, her and Apocalypse had a kid. And that kid became, yeah.
All right.
Rick Remender doesn't always think through anything.
Well, we have seen that. So I don't think this is as good as what we were just talking about with Uncanny, for sure.
I don't think it's as good as that Uncanny story, but it's around the same thing. Like, I think it's better than the Trial of Gambit at 324, which is not too far below it.
I don't know if I feel like I might go a little bit lower than that. Like, I think this is not as good as Phalanx Covenant, Final Sanction, or at 337, the Axis arc of Magneto.
That's fair. This is probably better than the first 6 issues of X-Men Evolution, though, right?
Yeah. Like, I'm looking at 341, the Submergence of Japan arc from X-Men, from Uncanny. I think this is, like, on par with that.
Submergence of Japan's better.
Yep.
It's got Moses Magnum.
All right, so this will be our new 342?
It will be our new 342, The Fall of Avalon.
All right. Now, for our third story, we are fast forwarding in time a little bit. So those were a little bit closer together.
Actually, Adam.
No, I'm wrong.
I want you to think about this. Because what you're,
doing math.
You know what you're thinking, and in your mind, it makes sense because it feels like distinct eras. But in fact, Adam,
it's not.
No, this is closer to the Fall of Avalon than Fall of Avalon was to that Bishop story.
That's true, because it was 3 years apart, and now we're only 2 years apart.
Yeah, we're talking about X-Men Volume 2, number 70, Homecoming. This is the world's greatest comics. X-Men. There are all new mutants in an all different adventure featuring a deadly homecoming. This is following right up from the end of Operation Zero Tolerance, following right up from the Trial of Gambit. And brother, is this a weird one?
Well, we're getting this is the big, splashy, what would you say, merging of what Joe Kelly had been building to with all of these individual characters.
Well, no. Joe Kelly hadn't been building to it. Scott Lobdell had been building to it.
Oh, that's true. No, you're right.
Steven Seagal was doing a little bit of like co-writing with Lobdell, but no, this is Lobdell leaves at the end of Zero Tolerance, and then they're like, "Ah, dang, we gotta do something about this."
So we do have this cast of new characters, right? We have Maggot. We have
my boy
Marrow.
You know I love Maggot. How many framed pictures of Maggot do you think I have in this room?
Let me guess 5.
1.
Here we go.
2.
It's counting.
3.
Maybe I did too low.
Is it only 3? I have more than.
There's got to be some more in there, hiding under something.
3 framed pictures of Maggot in here.
We got to work on that. Get you some more.
I gotta work on that. I only have 3 framed pictures of Maggot in here. One of them is very large, to be fair. One of them is beautiful and large, but yes.
So it's not just Maggot. We also have Marrow and Celia Reyes, who are being guided around by Iceman. And
right, coming straight out of Operation Zero Tolerance.
Yes, and we also have the return of, your classic team. So the cover is a riff on the Giant Size X-Men cover, sort of bursting through. And we have a very weird story here, because am I mistaken? This comes right after they return from space, right?
Yes, it's a mix of... So they return from space to do Trial of Gambit.
Right.
So that's Uncanny.
Okay.
Up to 350.
Yeah. So Trish Tilby is still hanging out with them, but Bishop
It's like
has
Trish
been...
Tilby... Bishop's lost in space.
Right.
Gambit has been left in Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph and Rogue are a thing now.
Mm.
And on the other... And Beast is with him. And on the other side of that... Oh, and Cannonball. Cannonball's also with him.
Yes.
On the other side of that, you have, from the Wolverine solo book, Wolverine, Cyclops, and Jean and Storm, like, dealing with the fact that, oh no, Bastion put a bomb in Cyclops, and he's going to explode.
Yes. And so this is a weird issue because not only do you have these two teams merging for the first time, but you have Cecilia Reyes trying to do emergency surgery with Wolverine bone claws on Cyclops. And who comes knocking on the door?
Oh, look, it's the Juggernaut. Did you see what happened, folks? Wouldn't you know it? Operation Zero Tolerance did strip the X-Mansion down to the studs, which is very funny. Which is why Cecilia Reyes has to do surgery with bone claws.
Right. No Shi'ar hospital inside the basement of the X-Mansion here.
No anything.
Yep.
But she has to do surgery with the bone claws. Iceman has just brought these two weirdos to live with the X-Men, with Cecilia and Marrow, who hates everybody.
Right.
Marrow, not a kind person. They have nothing. And then the Juggernaut shows up. He said, so, Professor Xavier's not a thing anymore, so this is my house. He says, I don't have to crush anything. I got a lawyer here. And he holds up the lawyer by his collar. He said, I met a lawyer friend, and he says this house is mine by law, and I don't have to do anything illegal to get this very nice mansion that my brother let all of these weird people live in instead of me, who he left to die in Korea.
Yep. I love the Juggernaut stuff here. The fact that he's got the lawyer just kind of perched like a parrot on his shoulder is really funny. Of course...
Carlos Pacheco, the artist on this, sells it real good.
Yes. I like the art. I think Pacheco does a good job. And obviously the Juggernaut does not leave peacefully. And they have to fight him. So he puts on his bands of Sidorak, and there's a little bit of a tussle. They do manage to rescue Cyclops, and this group of people now has to go, oh, are we a team now? What are we doing?
Okay, so I love how they rescue Cyclops, because everyone shows up. Like, everyone shows up in waves. It starts out with Iceman's people, like, he's like, listen, I have a whole mansion you guys can live in. Come say, oh no, there's nothing here. Right. And then the emergency comes in with Cyclops about to explode. Mm-hmm. And then all the X-Men come back from space. Then the Juggernaut shows up. And Cecilia Reyes, who does not want to be here, is sitting here the whole time shaking like, I'm a doctor. I am trying to save this man's life. Can somebody be normal? Please. For 1 second.
It's great.
It's very good. And what eventually happens is they find, even if they can get the bomb out of Cyclops, it's going to immediately explode. So Maggot walks up with this swagger, and this right here, this is where I start to love Maggot, because he becomes a real character under Joe Kelly. And instead of just like this weird guy that Scott Lobdell made up, he's a true character, and walks up, he's like, I got this. I got this. He says, Eenie, Meenie, do your thing. And he lets his slugs loose, and they eat the bomb, and one of them burps. And he's like, I'm
Good
so
boy.
cool. I am the best. My name is Maggot. I have disgusting powers, and I am the coolest man to ever live. Oh, I love Maggot.
It is interesting how different he looks inside the issue than on the cover. He's got the Chris Bachalo, Joe Mad design.
Yeah.
On the inside,
he's
he's just kind of normal sized. And then
what Kelly and Pacheco do with this is they take Maggot and they say, okay, so big blue, like mean guy. Mm-hmm. What if he wasn't blue all the time? What if he was actually a scrawny little African kid and the slugs like power him up?
Yeah.
And that makes it all works so much more, because then you got this guy who's got all this machismo, and it's unplaced because he's really just a young kid trying to figure out himself.
Yeah.
Like,
it works.
I like it. The design works a lot better because instead of having, like, it gives the X-Men another visually black mutant, where, you know, unfortunately, beyond Storm, a lot of them have had powers that make them look not black. Mm-hmm. For years and years. So it gives them that. Like, I am a Maggot advocate, but I think he legitimately works in this one.
Definitely. 100%. He's a lot of fun. There's some drama here with Trish Tilby that's sort of played off in the background. And we're just kind of left on, hey, this is going to be a new era for the book. I like it. I think it's fun. It's lighthearted. It's certainly not earth-shattering, but, Oh, I forgot. The other thing, the bone claws don't work. So Marrow has to break off a couple of not quite ready to go bones for Cecilia to use for the bomb. It's gross. And I like that there's a body horror aspect to this issue and these characters that, I do wish they stuck around a little bit more and had more of a presence.
Because this era with Kelly and Steve Siegel lasts for about 9 months.
Yeah.
Before they can it and say, let's bring back the classic team. Let's bring back Nightcrawler and Kitty and Colossus. And I love those characters. I truly, truly do. But the book was doing something a little bit different in this era. And I'm very curious if you don't fall out of you avoid the big doldrums of the late 90s, early 2000s. If this book doesn't stick around in like the way that Kelly and Siegel want it to. Yeah,
I agree. All right, so this is a fun book. I think this is obviously better than Fall of Avalon at 342.
I think it is. I'm trying to think. Where do we have X-Men 75?
Ooh,
because that is Anatomy of a Monster. That is at 210.
Okay.
That is just a bit after that, and it is a big like jam issue or big celebration issue with the Nagari and all that. Right from this era.
What are you thinking? I don't know if we're that high. I'm looking at 217 Madripoor Nights.
Okay. Yeah. What I'm honestly thinking is I think this is better than Anatomy of a Monster, but I'm kind of shocked where we ranked Anatomy.
Yeah, maybe we put
Monster. maybe that one's a little up there.
Maybe. Yeah, because there's some interesting things happening here.
Adam, we make choices on this list.
Yeah, like how is Arms of the Octopus at 196? Is it?
Because Arms of the Octopus is actually very good.
Yeah, it was good, isn't it? All right.
Yeah, that's the thing. Arms of the Octopus does rule.
Okay.
It's not as good as Power Pack 19, which is Guess It's Coming to Dinner.
No.
I would say that this... How do you feel about compared to Phoenix Resurrection, The Return of Jean Grey at 239?
I like this better.
See, that's where I think this area right here is stuff that we secretly do like a good amount.
Yeah.
But like don't know how to parse it right. Because we've got the road trip era X-Force. Hey, Adam. Spoilers for this week's comics or last week's comics, whatever. Can you believe that there's a sequel to X-Force 71 to 74 on stands now?
Pretty cool, right?
Wild stuff. Because I think it's like right around there in Battle World Inferno and World War X from Ultimates. Like this chunk is, I think, the right spot.
Yeah, I would agree. Might put this above Power Pack 20 at 225.
Yeah, but below Orphans of X.
Yes.
All New Wolverine.
Yeah, I think that might be a good place for it.
This is our new 225, and not just because I think Maggot is the bee's knees.
No, there's some really fun stuff happening here, and I agree with you that I wish this era had lasted a little bit longer, Like,
I get it. It's not what people wanted with the X-Men, but it's what I wanted, dang it.
God forbid anybody does anything different or new. All right, that was some really cool 90s stuff.
That was fun to talk about. I want to thank Ben Yakas. Ben, good job. If
Thank
you guys
you.
want to be like Ben, you can go over to patreon.com/comicsxf, toss a couple of coins into our coffers, dig down deep into your hearts and your pocketbooks and say, fellas, talk about an X-Men story that I want you to talk about. Because we continue to just have weird stories coming up and weird concepts for episodes, and I'm all for it.
Keep it coming, folks. This is great.
Make us suffer. Make us understand that this is odd stuff that the X-Men have done, and we got to deal with it.
We have made choices, and we need to deal with them.
Our entire life is just choices that we make, Adam. Hey, what do you got going on?
Not a lot right now. You guys can always follow me on Twitter at Arthur Stacy. Anything going on at Comics XF we need to hype up? Just normal excellence.
We continue to have the normal Comics X excellence.
Awesome.
That you have come to know and love from us. Follow us on Twitter, maybe leave us a review on iTunes.
That'd be great.
Whatever. Do your thing. Do your thing. What else? Oh, next week. Next week we have, and I quote, forgotten episode of the classic Claremont.
Ooh. Tantalizing.
It is tantalizing. Until then, folks, this has been Battle of the Atom. We hope you survived the experience.
Get it!